A month ago, we hired this lady and she stayed. That's me. I was going to ask, where do I sit? But it's quite clear. It's very clear. You need a microphone? You need a microphone, yeah. I think I need a microphone.
Arriva, arriva. Grazie.
Thanks. Huh?
Well, good afternoon. I'm Ian Lesser from the German Marshall Fund of the United States. It's a great pleasure to be here and to continue our conversation this afternoon on reshaping defense in the Mediterranean and its different aspects. And we have a wonderful group of people with us to talk to this subject. And just to give you a little bit of a roadmap, we're going to have a bit of a conversation up here. And hopefully we'll save some time in the end, we have 45 minutes in total, to take a few questions if there are some from the audience as well. But let me just tell you who we have very briefly. First of all, just to my left, Javier Colomina, NATO Secretary General's Special Representative for the Southern Neighborhood. Javier, thank you so much for being with us. Emil Hokayem, Director of Regional Security and Senior Fellow for the Middle East Security at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. Emil, thank you very much. And Eleonora Ardemani, Senior Associate and Research Fellow at ISPI. Eleonora, thank you very much for joining us as well. We have, if you've been listening over the last, day, you'll have been confronted with many different issues in a global context. If we think about security in the Mediterranean, we're talking about many things brought together, but complicated by the fact that not only are there multiple crises around the Mediterranean basin, but there's also a war going on in Europe. And especially when it comes to NATO's thinking on this subject, that has to be taken into account. So maybe, Javier, if I may, if I could start with you, in your role, but you've also been thinking about this for many years, I know, given all the competing priorities at NATO today, and let's be honest, probably the security situation in the East takes priority for a number of reasons that we know, how do you keep attention on and think about, with allies, challenges emanating from the South? Southern strategy, partnerships in the neighborhood, what keeps you busy?
Thank you very much, Ian, and thanks very much to the organizers for the invitation. So at the end of the day, the question we have to put to ourselves is if we have an option. Of course, for NATO, the centrality of what we do, and will continue to be like that, is our collective defense, is defense investment, the support to Ukraine since the war started in 2022. But if I have to name a fourth priority, that would be the work we do in the South. And actually the interlinkages between what we see happening in the war in Ukraine and what happened in the Middle East are clear. For instance, and is an easy example, we've seen the Iranian drones and the support of Iran to Russia in its war of aggression against Ukraine. So we need to make it happen. We need to work on the two priorities, even if, as I said, the centrality that we had in The Hague and that we will see in the next summit will be around collective defense investment, this famous 5%, but that 5% also allows us to do lots of things on our own collective defense in the southern flank, how we cooperate and we contribute to the security of our partners. NATO has 7 partners in the Mediterranean region, 4 partners in the Gulf region. We're working with them bilaterally. We're also working with them multilaterally through efforts with the European Union, with the GCC, with the League of Arab States, with the African Union. And these days, we're also thinking on how can we work with other actors that are essential for our security and for the stability of the different regions. For instance, we are opening avenues for dialogue with the other members of the Gulf that are not today partners of NATO. Those are Saudi Arabia and Oman. We are also trying to work with African nations that are fundamental for the stability of the continent. That, of course, matters a lot, particularly in the Sahel. Our only Sahelian partner is Mauritania. But as we all know, the Sahel today is the epicenter of terrorism, is where most of the problems we see that affect our security are coming from. And we need to work on migration, we need to work on border security, we need to work on geostrategic competition, we need to work on counterterrorism. So that's lots of things that are fundamental for the security and the stability of the Euro-Atlantic area that are affecting these days our southern neighborhood and that we need to work on.
Javier, thank you very, very much for starting us off. Eleonore, maybe I could turn to you now, if I could, and maybe say a word or two about how, especially from a European vantage point, how the crisis in Gaza, but more broadly the current challenges we're seeing in the Middle East, are causing Europeans to think about this issue of strategy south in the Mediterranean. Again, it's a similar question, although a different institutional setting to the one that I just posed to Javier, but in the broader European debate, is this getting the attention that it needs? And if not, why not?
Thank you, Ian. Certainly, the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and also the Red Sea crisis with the Houthis attacks in the Red Sea against the commercial vessels have both raised the level of attention in the EU and among European countries on the role of the Gulf states and the GCC states' role as security providers in the regions, as forces able to mitigate, or willing at least to mitigate threats. For instance, I remember in 2022, 2023, the first ever visit by Secretary General of NATO in Saudi Arabia, and I think it was really a watershed, since that visit underlined how much EU countries and also GCC states share common challenges and also perceive common challenges in the region. It was mentioned before about NATO partnerships, and this is a really important topic, since I think immediately to the IC, the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative between some Gulf states and NATO. I think the IC currently no longer mirrors the reality of cooperation between the GCC states and NATO, because practical cooperation has overcome established formats. And I would like to provide you a couple of examples. For instance, the NATO IC Regional Center in Kuwait that was opened in 2017 has become a hub for military education and training. And it is essential to share knowledge and also to boost the political dialogue between Gulf states and NATO members. And also Saudis and Omanis attend lessons and courses at the NATO IC Regional Center in Kuwait. And this means that practical cooperation has overcome the established formats. And another example that I would like to provide you is the NATO Regional Cooperation course at the NATO Defense College in Rome, which is another essential pillar for military education, and also Saudi personnel attends courses at the NATO Defense College, despite Saudi Arabia has opted out since the beginning from the IC. So I think that regional developments after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Red Sea crisis have accelerated this trend. And this trend has, in my view, a goal, which is overcoming current established frameworks in order to boost collective cooperation between all the GCC states and NATO.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I mean, the issues you mentioned have obviously been on the agenda for a long time, but the strategic environment has changed utterly in ways which are producing new demands. We can talk about that. Emil, if I could turn to you, maybe just say a word in relation to this about regional cooperation, regional alliances, new forms of alignment and security cooperation in the region that are emerging in response to this, and the opportunities, but maybe also the limitations that may exist.
Certainly, thank you very much for having me first. I think the countries in the region, talking non-Western countries, are looking at this new security environment and are being very transactional, very cynical, very level-headed in their dealings. So a decade ago, relations could not be worse between Turkey on one hand and Saudi and the UAE on the other. Now, if you look at defense cooperation between these actors on a bilateral level, quite significant. We see, you know, a decade ago in particular in the Eastern Mediterranean, all these countries were coming together to kind of contain Turkish power. Actually, that, you know, convergence of interest didn't produce much. They weren't able to significantly contain Turkish power, and then things change in the region, and we see that alliance, which is, you know, not really proper word, this cooperation essentially changed significantly. We see the Gaza war playing significantly into how people look at the source of instability threat in the region. A decade ago, almost everyone wanted Israel in. Now people essentially want Israel out until they figure out what kind of Israel they're dealing with. And fundamentally, I think the changing role of the US is critical. I would say from a Middle Eastern perspective, the underperformance, and I'm going to be hit by my neighbor right now, but of NATO in general, like you talk about ICI and those centers and so on. If you're sitting in the region, the last time you really heard about NATO was Afghanistan 2021. Not the best moment. It tells you something. And third is the massive geopolitical flux that exists. You don't want to commit to anyone unless that other person is willing to go all the way. And that's what we see happening right now. You know, the Saudi Arabia is essentially telling everyone, yeah, we want privileged relationship with the US. We're willing to go all the way, but we're not, we have conditions. We want to more than just a security relationship. And if it's not forthcoming, then we can afford to wait. There are other players out there. So much more transactional, much more cynical, not necessarily in the wrong way. But the question is, what underpins all that? I mean, you still need to build enough economic power, enough regional and international standing and so on to play that very difficult game. And I think we're still we're still not there in terms of the regional players.
If I might just follow up and ask you, what about the defense industrial side of this? I mean, obviously we're seeing new defense industrial patterns of cooperation, a lot of new investment, certainly on the European side. Maybe we might have a comment about how much of that will be relevant to the Mediterranean, but maybe just if you have a thought on that.
I mean, you have some big players in the region. I mean, certainly not by U.S. standards saying, but Israel is definitely in a tier one player. We've seen how it's able to develop weapon systems, deploy technology, and operate on battlefields. Definitely the case. But there are others. Turkey is definitely a country that has invested significantly and earlier than others, and is selling technology. By the way, is putting it to use. In Libya, in Syria, it took time for them to see the political returns, but in a way they've achieved a goal. Iran is a defense industrial player. It has exported its technology to Russia. You just mentioned it, but it has also used its technology. It hasn't performed as well in this past war, but in 2019 it kind of worked against Saudi Arabia. And then you have the two newcomers, essentially, Saudi and the UAE. And for them, their investment in the defense industry is driven by quite a complex set of factors. It's a statement of power and autonomy, is that we exist, recognize that we're players, we can embed ourselves in global technological supply chains, we can get IPs, we can build our own production chains. So we want to entangle you in our own development. There's another aspect, which is real economic diversification, especially for the UAE. It's an export-oriented base that they're developing. For Saudi Arabia, it's much more state building, I would argue. It's meant for primarily domestic consumption. They're not there yet. But all this is a way for them to plug themselves into the global discussion on technology, on supply chain, on logistics.
Okay. Javier, I want to come back to you maybe as a follow-up to the point that was just made, but Eleonora first, please, over to you.
Yes, building upon what Emilio Kayyem was saying, the GCC states are moving forward with the localization of defense industry at very different speeds. Saudi Arabia, for instance, has been focusing on maintenance, repair, overhaul, and on localizing components, while the United Arab Emirates have started earlier to invest in its defense industry and has also become a weapons exporter. So I think the GCC states face two big challenges when it comes to localizing defense industry. The first is building international defense partnerships, and this means cooperating with the US, first of all, also in terms of interoperability, but on the other side, they are also improving their cooperation with European and Asian states. Asian states which are not China, and this is also very interesting. So India, South Korea, Japan, and so on. I think that innovation can be a catalyzer for defense industry localization in the GCC states, since Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar have been massively investing in new technologies, but also in artificial intelligence, also in critical minerals, and in acquiring critical minerals for defense, especially the UAE. So I think what can make the difference for the Arab Gulf capitals is linking more and more the innovation drive with the localization of defense industry.
Well, thank you very much for that. Javier, I wanted to come back to you, perhaps, in a little bit in response to Emil's question, because his point, because there is an issue about the way in which partnerships relate to strategy. And I think it's true to say that traveling around the region and talking to Southern partners about this historically, you would often get the question, yes, we're very keen to work with NATO, but tell us what the strategy is. What are you trying to do? And then obviously that's changed over time, and a lot more effort has gone into this in recent years, I know. But maybe just to say a word about that, but also on the more specific question of defense investment for that's relevant to the South. You know, what is it that requires new investment? Is it missile defense? Is it making the space more transparent? It's probably all of those, maritime security, all of those things. But so the strategic part, but also the defense investment part looking southward.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll say a few things, and I could agree with some of the comments that Emile made, not all of them, of course, but it's actually after a clear-eyed assessment on the threats and the challenges that we identified in the South, that a year ago, not more than a year ago, we decided to launch an action plan on the Southern neighborhood, and a few days after, I was appointed as the first ever special representative for the South. So with that happening a year ago in the summit in Washington, I don't think it makes any more too much sense to refer to what NATO was doing in the past in the South, because we've decided to launch a new action plan, and we've decided to put in motion a new process and to have an individual, myself, pushing for that process. In a few years, if it's not happening, then you could tell me it's not happening. But at this stage, I think at least we took the right decisions. The action plan covers for different areas, political dialogue with our partners and non-partner nations, practical cooperation with our partners, multilateral organizations, presence in the region, and relationships with international and regional organizations. And for instance, as a clear consequence of the action plan, I just opened an office in Amman a couple of weeks ago, and we have reinforced quite robustly the activities and the physical presence of people from NATO in Kuwait to make that center more visible. Then, of course, you ask about defense industry, and you both mentioned the efforts of different actors in the region, the appetite to diversify defense industry, security alliances with everyone. We know we're not anymore on a block logic. We know that everyone has their own interest and could deal one day with Russia, the day after with China, and the third day with NATO. We have to live with that, and we have to just find the space and try to enlarge that space in the way we cooperate with these partners. But of course, we are not an organization that will bring heavy military equipment to our partners. It's not what we do. What we do and what we believe in the work we do with our partners is in capacity building, training, exercises, advise and assist, the things we do in Iraq, where we have 800 people. I would say that 800 boots on the ground assisting and advising the Iraqis is not a minor element of what we do, and is something that would be relevant enough to be mentioned when we talk about what NATO does in the South. But most of the things we do is the exercises, the capacity building efforts that we have in Mauritania, in Jordan, or in Tunisia, plus the ones in Iraq, the work we do with our Gulf partners. At the end, it is mostly for them to decide if what we bring to the table is enough for them. We're not going to bring Article 5 to our partners. What we bring is a way to relate very closely with an alliance that still today covers for almost 60% of the military might of the world. And on the defense industry bit, yes, indeed, people is looking to diversifying their defense industry efforts and their security connections. Fine, and we all know about what the Saudis signed with Pakistan. But I want to remind everyone, and I'm sure everybody knows, that if you put together all aircraft carriers in the world, you don't get to the number of the aircraft carriers that only the US has. And every aircraft carrier of the US is 30% bigger than the next one of every single country in the world. And that's just an example of the military might and the ability that NATO has to actually build on security alliances, to build on capacity, building capacities for our partners and help our partners to defend themselves more properly. It is for them to decide what they want to do, that's for sure.
Javier, just to build on a point that you made, actually you've all mentioned it in some sense, this question of the American role, it's asked in the East, but it also is a question in the South. My impression is that, in fact, there is a bit of a myth of American disengagement in the South, certainly in terms of, in military terms that you've described. There's perhaps more presence now, Sixth Fleet and other things, than there has been for the past decades. That's crisis-driven to some extent. But how much of a variable is this? I mean, because you could say that when you ask this question about European strategic autonomy, whether it's centered in NATO or it's elsewhere, this is one place where Europe can reach, Europe can do things. Europe doesn't, it's not a stretch for Europe to be a major security actor in the Mediterranean, already is. And I'd be interested in actually all of your views about that. Is this a kind of key test for Europe's ability to project security in its own neighborhood that's maybe in some ways an easier reach than some other things we could be talking about? But I mean, Javier, if you'd like to start, and then we'll go along.
I can start. Well, I do think that this engagement by the Americans, coming already, if we go back in time with this pivot to Asia, is a bit of a myth. At the end of the day, a superpower, and I think one thing has shown the last months, is that the only real superpower in international relations continues to be the US. It's the only one that, with its failures and its successes, is able to push a file till the end. Sometimes we don't like what they do or how they do it, but it's the only one. I mean, the failures of the Trump administration were not followed by any real effort by any other powerful nation. We didn't see the Chinese coming with a plan when they failed here or there. So at the end of the day, it shows how powerful is still the presence of the Americans. And the Americans, by sustaining what they've done, they need to be present. And even though they continue to talk sometimes about, well, the usual isolationism versus multilateralism, but at the end of the day, it's sort of a myth. Then, of course, NATO is very much led by the US. It's a security and defense organization, and there's nothing that you could compare in the world in terms of security and defense than the US military might. So it's a leading nation for us, but I would argue it's a leading nation in general. But the European Union should do much more than what they're doing. And I think they have decided to take the right decisions. I am, in background, a Spanish diplomat, so very fond of the European Union. I think they should do much more. They're taking the right decisions. Still, I think that what should at the end be the frame of what we do in terms of security and defense is the transatlantic relationship. Within that transatlantic relationship, the European Union and Europeans in general should do much more. But I think it would be a mistake if we end up breaking that transatlantic alliance, that transatlantic relationship and the transatlantic bond that has worked for all of us pretty well in the last decades.
Eleonora, maybe if I could come to you and then come to you, Emil, on this question. Is this a key theater for European strategic autonomy, looking south to the Mediterranean?
Well,
how big of a variable is this American engagement, American presence?
I think that the southern neighborhood that we see from the European perspective is also the southern neighborhood the GCC states perceive. The GCC states have their own southern neighborhood, which is the Red Sea and also Africa. And in this theater, the European states and the GCC states, I think they can try to reach an understanding on some specific issues, for instance, countering non-state armed actors and jihadi groups, for instance, trying to secure maritime vital waterways, and also trying to, for instance, secure submarine cables. So there are issues in which the European states and the GCC states can cooperate and work together. With regard to the US and the role, the international role of the US, seen from the Gulf, from the perspective of the Gulf monarchies, I think the Gulf monarchies are pursuing a combined strategy with regard to defense now. From one hand, they are trying to improve their defense capabilities in order to achieve in the long term, and I would like to underline in the long term, defense autonomy. But at the same time, they are trying to complement the US, not to replace it. And this goal is pursued through a series of defense partnerships and agreements. Special Representative mentioned the recent Saudi-Pakistan Mutual Defense Pact. I would also add the executive order that President Trump recently released, approved, which announces a lot the security guarantees for Qatar. And this has an implication for Gulf security, since for the first time we have a Gulf state which has higher and stronger security guarantees from Washington with respect, for instance, to the UAE and to Saudi Arabia. The UAE is the major defense partner of Washington together with India. This is an agreement that entails unprecedented military cooperation, but not security guarantees. And Saudi Arabia has been pursuing since many years a defense treaty with the US, but this has not been translated into reality so far. So the new executive order of President Trump creates a defense asymmetry between the GCC states. And this is something that I think we could highlight more than it has been so far, since it will need adjustments in terms of security and defense also between the GCC states.
Thank you very much. Emile, if I could ask you how, just reflecting on what you've just heard, how will this be seen, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean? This balance of, evolving balance between American and European defense roles, are there preferences? I can certainly imagine them on the Turkish side, for example, but are there others for Egypt, for other actors in the region?
Essentially, look, the region doesn't see US disengagement. They see US retrenchment or rethinking of what it wants to do, how it wants to do it. 20 years ago, the US was all about trying to bring actors together on some kind of comprehensive umbrella. The Americans have become much more pragmatic, so they work on our air defense between a number of countries. They're trying to bring people together for discrete missions and so on. I think the big political project is obviously normalization between the Arab states and Israel, and I think this is now in the freezer for a number of years. But operationally, what the Americans try to do is to create enough incentives for the militaries to work together, entangle them, and then to facilitate their big political project. I think that may change. I think there's a reluctance by regional actors to we're not yet in the post-Gaza war. There's still a lot of suffering. There's still probably conflicts on the horizon. This would be an opportunity for the EU and European actors to say, but we don't see it yet. First, there is political dysfunction in a number of key capitals. The debate over increased investment in defense has been torturous, painful. Ukraine is still the big priority, as it should be, don't get me wrong. But when you look at it from far, you don't see necessarily all these European actors really emerging as big players. And yes, the US is the biggest player, but I would be careful not to count how many ships or personnel or planes they have to assess the quality of the engagement. The US has supported Israel in its air wars against Iran, and that went pretty well by their own standards. But the US also has deployed massively in the Red Sea to degrade and possibly deter the Houthis, and has failed and has decided they're out of the game. So my point is, yeah, they may have all these aircraft carriers. It depends what you want to do with a realistic time frame, what are the trade-offs, and what are the pressures from within. And Middle Eastern countries they're not blind to these realities. They're just really assessing in a very realistic way what they can get from whom, and that drives their long-term defense procurement, their choices in terms of defense cooperation.
I mean, I want to save a little bit of time to come to all of you if you have a question or two. Gosh, there's a lot of hands. I'll save more than a little time. But I have one of my own. Looking at the Red Sea experience thus far, with all of that effort that's gone into it, what is the lesson of this? That, you know, sophisticated platforms deployed, all sorts of things done, lots of kinetic activity. The Red Sea still isn't open to commerce. What lesson do we take from that? Whoever would like to.
No, I'm happy to do that.
Please.
Take seriously the nature of your adversary. Don't think that just because you have air dominance, you can change things that quickly. Take the other party's motivation seriously. Understand they're in for the long game. They will be in that space for years to come when the main theater has moved elsewhere and so on. And I think the expectation that was set that somehow give it a few months, give it a year or so, and you're going to degrade the Houthis significantly has been disastrous. But importantly, I think to be fair to the military personnel involved in that, we're asking them to deliver military results where there's no politics, there's no bigger strategy, there are no politics around. So we want them to deliver something, reopen the trade routes without necessarily working on with politics, with regional developments and so on. And
Eleonora, please.
I would like to highlight a couple of possible lessons learned from the Red Sea crisis. The first is that the Houthis' attacks against vessels in the Red Sea are about regional politics, are about Gaza, are about their support from Iran, but are most of all about Yemen and the conflict, the war in Yemen, since the Houthis are a local actor with local goals, with strong connections and partnership with Iran, but most of all they are a local actor which is trying to play its own game in the Red Sea, and this makes even more difficult for regional players and international players to find a possible common ground in order to tackle this crisis, which starts in Yemen and then spread also in the Red Sea. Second, very short lesson learned is that the Gulf states, the GCC states, all perceive Red Sea as a national interest. The Red Sea security is a national interest for all the GCC states, but unfortunately, the GCC states don't have a common Red Sea policy. Since national interest, since rivalries, competition still prevail on finding a common ground. And this is not only about countering Houthis' attacks in the Red Sea, but this regards especially the building of a security governance framework for the Red Sea.
Okay, thank you very much.
I like to add, and I think it's very complementary to what we heard, particularly with the last intervention, that one lesson learned is that these things are very complex. It's not as easy as I have 12 aircraft. Of course it's not. It's much more complex than that. But I have to say that at the end of the day, what we are seeing in the Red Sea is affecting half or whatever number of the global trade. So it's affecting much more nations than the Europeans or the US. It's affecting brutally the Egyptians.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, yes, the ones that decided to try to do something were the Brits, the Americans, a bit the Gulfists. But at the end of the day, it's a very complex situation that, yes, indeed needs lots of tools, not just the military ones, but also the diplomatic ones. But even if you use all those tools, you might not get anywhere. And even if you use the power of the most power military nation, you won't get there. And even if you use the one of the powerful regional powers, you might not get there. I don't think it has to be a blaming game. It has to be a realistic and realpolitik approach, the one we have here. And at the end of the day, is extremely complex because of many of the things that you said, particularly. of the fact that the priorities are completely different, and it's very difficult to put an end to something, even, I would say, not because of the effort is badly approached or badly directed from the US, the Brits, the Europeans, the Egyptians, or the Gulfists, but because sometimes it's just not enough to put an end to a situation that is very complex.
Thank you very much. We have time for a few quick, if I may stress, questions. If we could go just right there, and then we'll come along. We won't be able to get to all of you. I apologize in advance, but if you're quite crisp, it'll help.
I wrote it. Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you so much for this panel. This topic is very needed. Sir, you mentioned the support of Iran to Russia, and you forgot to mention the support of the US to Israel, supposedly defending itself against the weaponized entity, which is why I want to raise this question. I want to ask you why these institutions like the NATO didn't interfere when one of the Gulf states had an external attack, talking about Qatar, Doha, forgetting that we're talking within a context of several agreements that were signed between the two entities. So now we're seeing only a direct influence from the US, countries like the US, sorry. Should this make all the agreements signed with your institution ineffective, like the one we're seeing with Qatar? In few words, where is the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative in this? Okay,
Istanbul Cooperation Initiative. Maybe I take a couple and then you can pick and choose which ones you do or don't want to answer. We're doing this logistically easily, so yes. Just to you, please.
Very short. I wanted to bring to the table one issue, which is that of security sector reform, security sector governance, which has been for a long while on the agenda for NATO partnerships. We understand that in an environment which is increasingly transactional, as it has been said, and with defense budgets increasing, there is a need for not only better spending, but also for spending for the good of the population, which is not just security of the state, but it's human security as well, something which is very much needed in the region. So is there still room for that as you see it from your different perspectives?
Okay, and I think we have time for certainly one more. Well, two more, if they're really quick, please. There you go. Thank you, and then we'll go right over there, please.
Hello, hi, my name is Grazia Vacillo. So my question is about climate. I just come back from a summit in Montreal on climate security where the NATO CASCO was also co-hosting. And I lead a large team of scientists from the CGIAR system, probably you know, that really looks at the connection between climate, fragility, conflict, migration, displacement. So my question is about this. How is NATO, how are countries in the Gulf preparing or in any way accounting for the role the climate has in exacerbating fragility, conflict, root causes of fragility, conflict, displacement, and migration? Because this is particularly important not only to shape and reshape the defense, but also to anticipate and prevent the escalation of conflicts. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. And just one more right over there, if we can. Thank you. Right, I think, all right, well.
Very quickly, you mentioned Star Wars. Sea and Gulf and Red Sea, it's very difficult to control and patrol. So where I asked to the panelists where the space dimension is, where Starlink and GPS are on one side, and where also the Chinese have made a great stride into space, but Europe and the Middle East probably is a distant follower. Is there something new coming up?
Okay, so we've got, and it's going to have to be very brief. I mean, don't feel free to not pick up on everything, but there's ICI, there's security sector reform, there's the climate security piece, and there's space and defense tech. We won't get to all of those, but please pick one or two that you'd like to talk to. Javier, please.
Yeah, I think I should be responding to the dire question on ICI, and I mentioned the Iranian drones and Ukraine because I was connecting the two theaters. So there was no need to mention the support that the US brings to Israel that is well known. So that to clarify. ICI is alive and kicking. ICI is a platform that was created 21 years ago, and that should serve the purpose of us cooperating with our Gulf partners, and for our Gulf partners to feel that they're cooperating properly with us. But we're not in the business of chasing anyone to cooperate with us. We're not in the business of convincing anyone that that is working. It's for them to see the benefits of that platform and the benefits of the cooperation. I'm sure, of course, we were all shocked when we saw the events on September 9th. The Qataris probably immensely, and 2 weeks after they signed the security agreement with Washington. So one thing that is essential to understand when you deal with security and defense and with politics in general is that you need to be pragmatic as much as you can. And of course, nothing is ideal, nothing is optimal, but you need to find a way to make it work. We are these days working quite well, particularly with our Qatari friends, even, of course, if the 9th of September was, as I said, a hiccup, not just for Washington, but also for NATO. But we continue to work with them, and we will continue to be able to provide, in my view, the needs they have in terms of capacity building.
Emile, I'm conscious of our time, but please, very, very briefly.
Yeah, let me just address the issue of security sector reform. The world has changed since, Western countries went to Iraq and Afghanistan and tried to build large forces and so on. Didn't work that well. You had to do it several times and still not sure. But anyway, the point is that the normative approach that existed at one point where you build those forces in a specific way for specific missions and you have timetable, I think this is in the past. We can talk about how bad that is that we've moved over. But I think with this fragmented international system, with the erosion of norms and so on, people are not interested in that. But there are 3 places in the Middle East at the moment that need security sector reform / defense modernization. Syria, for instance, need a massive investment in security sector reform to make sure that the new military is capable of fulfilling its mission, is capable of, that would be part of a state-building project, right? But, who's doing it? Who's coordinating that? The Turks do their thing, the Jordanians do their thing, the Westerners are obsessed with counterterrorism. We know from Yemen and so on that don't lead with counterterrorism. You have to do other things. It's really the beginning of that conversation. Lebanon needs defense modernization and money, not really pure security sector reform. But how can you do that while the Israelis are still bombing from the air when there's all that pressure and so on? And then Palestine is a huge deal as well. Like, you need to stand security forces. But do you do it in service of the population for really understandable reason? Or do you do it in service of the dominant actor, Israel, that will essentially define the contours of what can be done and so on? And we don't know how to proceed right now. There are random language in all these declarations, but we're nowhere close to operationalizing something on all 3 countries.
Okay, Emile, thank you very much. Eleonora, very quickly, a last word.
Yes, 3 points on security sector reform, very briefly. The first is that currently security sector reform, or better defense transformation, stands at the top of Gulf states' interest. And this was not the same in the past, also in the last decade. So this can also trigger further cooperation, I think, with NATO as partner. And the second point is that the power of example matters. So I think that cooperation between militaries, military education sharing between NATO and GCC states countries can make the difference. And this can be more relevant in terms of outcome instead of simple statements on good governance. And the third and last point is that I think we will see in the coming months and also years a stronger Gulf states investment in security sector reform in Syria and also in Lebanon, with Qatar, for instance, which is already a main donor for the Lebanese armed forces. And this can also bring a new dynamic in the Levant scenario.
Leonora, Emil, Javier, thank you very, very much for this discussion. Please join me in thanking our speakers.